Hello and welcome to the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, where we discuss self-aware leadership with thinkers from around the globe. I'm your host, Nia Thomas. Join me as we talk to today's guest. Today's guest is Dr. Craig Dearden Phillips MBE. He's a social entrepreneur, author, and leadership expert with a long-standing commitment to empowering purpose-driven leaders. Craig has founded and led several impactful organisations, and his work has consistently focused on developing the inner capabilities of leaders. His insights bridge the world of business, social impact, and personal growth, making him a really powerful voice in today's evolving leadership landscape. I've worked with Craig for a few years, and he's one of those maverick minds that knows a lot of things about a lot of things, and he's always up to something purposeful and innovative. He's clearly passionate about his work, bringing people together on the basis that the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Craig has a wealth of knowledge and a huge network of connections. So if you lead a charity or any kind of social enterprise, to not be connected with Craig and Social Club, which he'll tell us a bit more about shortly, means that you're really missing out on the opportunity to learn from Craig's vast knowledge. With his unique blend of practical experience and reflective depth, Craig brings a unique perspective on the role of self-awareness in shaping authentic, effective leadership. Craig, it is lovely to have you here.
Well, thank you, Neil. Would you send that to my dad, please? That's the most. It's almost like a kind of eulogy. It's fantastic. I've never heard myself described in such flowing terms, flowing and glowing terms before. So thank you for making me feel good at the beginning of this interview.
That's wonderful. So tell us a little bit about your career and how did you get to here?
How did I get to here? Okay, so just. I'm 56 years old now, so I've been at it for about just over 30 years. I started my career in my mid-20s, really. I entered the world I'm kind of still part of as a very junior care worker working with adults with learning disability in my 20s. And I think like with a lot of first jobs, you learn a lot of the most important things in them, really. And I learned about the importance of leadership at local level. I worked under some brilliant registered managers, some bloody awful ones as well. And I also learned the importance of staff in the lives of people who are vulnerable. You know, how you go about your little job really matters to people, and how you turn up in people's lives really matters. And these are all things which are kind of true now as they were then. So I think some of those really important things just went in quite early with me. And so it all started in care. I always recommend that some people do care work at some stage. It's a really good way of getting to know yourself and know others. I'm looking at your background there. And I think it's also, I also found care as a great place to, I think, experience the important things in life. I think the important things in life to me are about connection and doing care work, you know, and I'm talking about intimate care work here as well, you know, the stuff that people say, oh, this isn't very nice or whatever. Doing that kind of work is actually very, very intimate. It brings you very close to somebody in every sense. And there's something about doing that is very important to your development, I think. So I always advise young people, if they ever ask me, try doing care work. You know, try to get my kids to do it. You know, you learn something quite important about life, I think. So that's how it all started. And then I kind of moved into developing organizations really from some of the things I picked up there, which animated me. So you know, that's how it started. It started in care.
It's very humbling work. And as you say, you really get to know people and what's important to people. In my research, something that came up time and time again was the self-awareness of members of staff and how, particularly health members of staff and clinicians, how they impact people's recovery. And that actually, if you're not aware of yourself and your impact on others, you do have an impact on somebody's recovery and their well-being.
Yeah. I remember seeing something about that research, and it's like, it's not necessarily, even if someone's given the same sort of treatment, you know, the same pathway, the same drugs, the clinician that deals with them has an additional impact, and isn't that just incredible?
It is. And it's also a bit scary because we have good days and we have bad days.
Yes.
And you need to be very aware that on those bad days, you are having that kind of impact on the people around you.
Yeah, 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 exactly. So how we turn up in other people's lives is vital really, and that's kind of one of the things we talk a lot about. You mentioned social club. That's something I've been involved, set up 10 years ago, partly because I wanted leaders to have somewhere they could turn up, be themselves, but also learn, grow, go back out there and turn up better than they would do otherwise, and feel both restored but also, you know, given tools, practical tools sometimes as well to be more effective in what they were doing. And that's what motivated the setup of Social Club really. I just met too many people who said, look, Craig, I'm lonely, I'm isolated, I'm not developing anymore, I'm not learning anymore. What can I do? And I just thought, well, you could go and do an MBA, or you could become part of a community of leaders. So we set one up and we haven't looked back, which has been good.
Yeah, and I've come to quite a few social club
You do.
events and learning opportunities, and I think they're brilliant. If listeners and watchers want to find out more about social club, where do they go and how do they connect with you?
They go to a website. It is wearesocialclub.co.uk. That's wearesocialclub.co.uk. That has, that's the best place. That tells you about the club and what's going on. If they want to get in touch with me, you can. I'm on LinkedIn, Craig Dearden Phillips. My email address is craig@socialminds.org.uk. That's social minds as in the mind, socialminds.org.uk. I'm pretty responsive. I'll get back in touch. So yeah,
Wonderful.
feel
And we'll
free.
make sure that those links are in the show notes too.
Oh yes, thank you.
So if you were to describe yourself as a leader, particularly as you say you've worked very much hands-on and you've worked with other leaders, how would you describe yourself as a leader?
Oh, that's a great question. So most of my leadership experiences now are as a chair. I'm chair of three things at the moment, which is a great honour. Four actually, technically, but very different entities. And the chair role is very different to being a chief exec. The job is not the doing; it's ensuring the doing, it's and assuring the doing, and also supporting the doing, and also strategizing the future doing as well. So it's a hands-off role, and I try to discharge that role in a way that because my primary interface as a chair is with the chief officer, and the chief officer needs a heady mix, in my experience, of heartfelt support, knowing that you've got their back. That's really important for a chief officer. It feels a very lonely place if you don't know your chair's got your back, but also a place of genuine intellectual challenge as well. It's hard to steer a ship. You need many good minds to help you do it. Leading that set of minds is the chair and the Neds and the rest of the board. So I think providing sort of heady intellectual challenge is part of what I think good leadership's about for me. And I think what would I say that I think the third thing for me in terms of how I go about leadership is to ensure that the right conversations take place in the boardroom. A lot of boards are fairly timid places. They're either places where there's a lot of cheerleading and not a lot else going on, or they're places that without really good stewardship can turn into semi-toxic or worse environments in which very little real work gets done. So, my job as chair is to create the most sort of fertile environment for progress and value adding work. That is the essence of what I do in boards. Do I get it right all the time? Not always, I don't think. I think it's all my boards are different. All of them require a slightly different me as well to be there. Some of them require a very sort of energetic and come on, let's have some courage here, me. Some of them are a little bit too buoyant and need a bit of, come on, boys and girls, let's get down to business here, let's get some work done. Some of them are a little in need of other things. So I think how you turn up as a leader slightly depends on the type of environment you're in as well. You have to be a bit of a chameleon in that you have to learn to play the required role, and that might means being not an actor but somebody who can play a variety of roles depending on what's required as well.
And
And
that's a really interesting segue into my next question, which is, what does self-awareness mean to you? Because you've just said that you've got to be very aware and
mm,
you have to be what that situation needs you to be at that particular point in time. So what is self-awareness for you?
I think that we could do a very philosophical discussion about where the self ends and the rest of it begins here, and perception and how that interacts with the essential self. But putting that to one side, I think if I have any gifts, I think my situational awareness is good, and it gets better as you get older, I think, as well. And I think situational awareness, being able to know others, read others, and read the room as well. These are all part of what the podcast would term knowing others. I think that's part of my A game, if I use that term. Knowing self, I think I think where this interacts there is that one needs to be able to think, right, okay, I think I've read this. Where do I fit into this? What do I need to give to this situation, these other people, and what do I need to draw on in myself? So that, and I think an ability to slightly step out of yourself, ask yourself what's required, and offer it. And that means, I meditate a lot, and there's a thing in meditation that's all about sort of stepping out from yourself a bit and being able to almost observe yourself and observe your emotions and observe, how you are, what's going through you. Because as human beings, this more than me, we're prone to our emotions taking over, Steve Peters and all that, the chimp mind, our brains and our emotions flood us with stuff. And I think as a self-aware leader, you've almost got to be able to sidestep that because, let's say the temperature's going up in the room, not joining in that and not being triggered by it is key to, you know, if you like, managing down, de-accelerating that momentum into conflict. So I think, and again, I took this from care a bit because in care, people do all sorts of stuff that's partly about testing limits, let's say, and being able to kind of work with that. The training you get is, well, look, you've just got to step back here, and you've got to de-escalate here. And again, I think as a leader, as a chair, being able to observe yourself, put in what's needed, and respond is really important. Which is a bit different from the blood and thunder view of leadership, where you're very much emotionally at the front and you're all in. I can do that as well, but chairing roles have taught me that you have to be in control of yourself and know in order to be of use to
Yeah.
others.
It's interesting that I've had cause to respond to somebody on LinkedIn today because they were talking about the behaviour of boards and maybe behaviour wasn't necessarily as positive as it needed to be. And I also had a podcast conversation with Dr. Paul Fury probably about a year ago now, and we were talking about behaviour on boards. If you, as the chair, have somebody across your board, and you mentioned NEDs earlier, and I was just thinking if we've
Yes.
got listeners and watchers from overseas, a NED is a non-executive director. If you've got a NED or a trustee on a board who maybe isn't self-aware, how do you deal with that? Because I appreciate de-escalating is about in the moment and changing the conversation. But what if you have a particular individual and you need to have a conversation? Where do you start?
I'll give an example, I think, because it very much happened in the recent past. So on one of my boards, we had an executive director who was unwittingly very, very rude.
Oh.
They didn't quite get it when it came to how they sounded
Mm.
and the effect they had on other people. You'd struggle not to notice it if you were, if it was me or you. But I think this person's own psychological makeup was one where, they'd spent 30 years in aggressive boardrooms, really aggressive boardrooms and this was somebody it was a woman in a man's world. She'd had to really kind of bang the table to get heard and in this very macho company that she worked in. And she brought that into our boardroom and it didn't work as a style. And so it happened a couple of times, and I thought, no, this is this. And I was a new chair, and we had an offline, and I said, how do you think it's going in the board? So I asked her first of all, how do you think it's going? She said, well, I just don't think I'm getting through to people. I just don't think people are hearing me. And I said, I think you're right. I think people they're not hearing your points
Mm.
and your message. They're hearing your style and they're reacting to the way you're communicating more than the substance. The substance is brilliant, by the way. But it's being lost in the noise. And we talked about how in the context of our board, the best way for her to be heard was, and it meant a shift in style for her from being sort of supercharged and a bit table bangy to being a much more emollient and gentle
Mm.
communicator. And that's still a work in progress, I have to say. But I think the penny dropped when I said, look, people are not hearing you.
Mm.
They're just reacting to you. I think that was quite important for her because to be effective in a former context, she had to bang the table.
Yeah.
So yes, it was about for her. It's about unlearning some behaviour. She's doing great, but I did talk about it with her because
Mm.
because she's talented. She was just not able to be heard because of her style. Yeah.
That kind of feedback is really important because one thing that I've learned through my research and working on the Speak Up program when I was in Great Ormond Street was that
Mm.
often people don't know. This has never been raised with them. And therefore, how would they know? Because, as you say, if you've always worked in one context and that is how you had to do it, unless somebody's had a conversation with you about the context is different, the behavior is different, and communication expectations are different, how would you know? So I think being brave and having that conversation with somebody is so important because, as you say, the message is really important. It's just getting lost in the noise.
Yeah, and I think the art of it, I think, Nia, is it would have been very easy for her to have taken umbrage at that
Mm.
message, foregrounding it with you know, the positives, the value of her contribution
Yeah.
and what she brings to the party, and my concern that that was finding its way into the meeting was the way in with it because then that helped then to say, look, it's not just your problem here. It's the fact that we've got a set of people here who are used to a certain way of working, and it's just a bit different to the way you've had to work in the past. And to be effective in this environment, as you were in your other one, you'll probably need to adjust a little bit so
Yeah.
that it's not all on her and she's able to take the positives of what we were saying as well. And I've learned that better along the way as well
Mm.
because I've been I've been at the end of feedback myself sometimes, and it's so much easier when you're given some positives to hold on to with the stuff
Yeah.
that you really need to think about.
Yeah. Definitely. You've worked across quite a few different sectors from
Yes.
social enterprise and leadership development. What have you noticed about different sectors, or maybe there are similarities when we're talking about leadership? Are there things that you can take across from different sectors, or is it very much horses for courses? And maybe what we just talked about that individual who came from a very different sector. Are there things that she brings, or are there things that she has to leave behind, or both?
Yeah, these are great questions. So the first thing to say, I think, is that there are more similarities and differences across sectors. I work in all sectors now, public, private, voluntary. I'd say that there are more sort of uniting factors than differences because, we're dealing with people, human beings, that they tend to have similar needs in all sectors. I think where I see the biggest differences aren't so much across sectors as across business stages. So, startups are very different to, businesses going through their major growth phase after that. And again, are very different from established corporates. So, my biggest board is it's a 350 million pound turnover company. And it's very much got a kind of boardroom corporate, turn up in your tie kind of culture that's quite traditional in many respects. But if I went into, say, the boardroom of Bernardo's, I suspect it's got more in common with that boardroom. And likewise, a couple of the scratchy startups I'm involved in the private sector, they're quite like the ones that I'm involved in the voluntary sector. That their boards are faster moving, they're more informal, they're more urgent, and the requirement of the people in them is broadly similar. So I'd say it's not so much differences between sectors as between stages. That's how I'd characterize it there.
Are you looking to improve your business relationships? Have you found yourself dealing with employee conflicts? Are you ready to elevate your perspective to a position of greater awareness? If so, the Self-Awareness Superhighway, Charting Your Leadership Journey, is the book for you. Here's just a fraction of what you'll learn. What self-awareness is and why it's critical for your reputation. How increased self-awareness will boost your business relationships. How you can leverage self-awareness to excel in your leadership. Practical steps to develop your self-awareness skills. How you can capitalize on constructive feedback from others. How you can be at the forefront of people centricity in the hyper-digital age. Even if you focused on only one development tool to move in one direction on your superhighway, you'll have achieved growth worth more than the price of the book. In the Self-Awareness Superhighway, you'll discover the 9 chartable compass points to guide your unique journey of learning, growth, and leadership development. Explore the directions of care, humility, authenticity, and more to map your journey from just leading to self-aware leadership. Be guided by people-centric signposts and directions and navigate workplace roadblocks and trip hazards. Get insights from guests of the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast and reflect on your own experiences. Recognize your impact on others and explore your opportunities for change based on informed choices and expanded awareness. You can buy your copy from Amazon, Waterstones, Barnes & Noble, Foyles, Blackwell's, and other good online and high street bookstores. Grab a coffee, find a comfy chair, and dive in.
You often commentate on UK politics, and I love reading your LinkedIn posts when you're talking about politics. I think it's great. And you often lift the lid on things that maybe you think other people are thinking, but not necessarily brave enough to be writing about, particularly about how it impacts the charitable sector. In my research, and I had a conversation with Amy Gandon many episodes ago, we talked about the differences between political leaders and organisational leaders. So you've mentioned the stage of organisations. What are your thoughts on the different behaviours that you're coming across politically versus organisations?
Yeah, I think political leadership is a very different set of requirements to corporate or organizational leadership. A political leader is generally leading a coalition. Every political party, even some of these very niche parties, tend to be coalitions of people whose beliefs range from within quite a wide continuum. So I think leaders in those contexts are essentially quite skilled at managing coalitions. I think that's the alpha skill, I think, in that context. And I think being able to, party management, I think is a great gift for good political leaders. And, our current crop vary in their abilities there. I think it's a very, very tough ask, I think, of a political leader. And obviously political leaders in power have a different set of requirements on them to those out of power. An out of power leader has to be able to be extremely articulate about the kind of political choices in front of the electorate without the backup of having, a government machine or a government's achievements to point to. I think a politician in power has not only the job of party management, but also the job of a massive administrative political machine, which is, the government plus the civil service. It's, whether at national or local level, that's a difficult job. And it's very much about selecting the right people for the right positions, but also satisfying the continuing needs for party unity, and to recognize you're managing something very heterogeneous and very, very volatile as well. So, I've never really fancied myself as a political leader. I had a fork in the road when, in my sort of, probably after my first career ended, I did consider a career in politics. I was elected. I got myself elected locally, won really well. It was really great. And then I got into it and I thought, oh my God, this is, just managing a group within a council was, it's a thankless task. It's really, really difficult. A lot of time and energy just to be a semi-viable opposition. And I just made a bit of a calculation here that I could be doing this or I could be doing some other stuff.
Yeah. And
in my short time on this earth, I decided that I would try and do some more social impact and less party management stuff, which I think was going to be my lot if I ever got anywhere with it. I have good friends who became senior politicians, and I think there are very few politicians who feel that they've been successful. A lot of them feel a sense of failure, or at least a sense of opportunities missed. I think a lot of them find it deeply frustrating and struggle sometimes to measure their impact in any tangible way. So it's a very tough gig. Obviously, there are politicians that are transformative. History tells us that. But I think for a lot of politicians, it's very arduous, and it's quite a gamble with your life. I think because you've got not I don't mean literally life, but if you spend your career doing it, you can quite easily get to the end struggling to point to anything. And I think that's why I didn't do it, I think, rather than what I did end up doing, because I'm a quite political person, but I didn't want to do full-time politics. I learned that from being a councillor.
Yeah, politics is a tough gig. I think that's what we see from all the
you're an
leaders
ex-civil servant and you've seen them up close.
Yeah.
And it's hard to envy the life sometimes, I think.
Yeah. So whilst we're talking politics and what might be coming from the UK government in the future, I think the non-profit sector is really going through a very difficult time at the moment.
Certainly.
The way that money used to flow through contracts and fundraising has very much changed in the last 5 to 10 years. What are your thoughts on how we are going to steer this ship through the storm?
Wow. So everything you said is true, by the way. This is very turbulent. I remember 2008. That didn't impact us as hard as this last period has, actually, because most organizations were sitting on reasonably good balance sheets, and government was still spending quite a lot of money. Government's quite a big oil tanker, and even when the recession hit, it took at least 2 or 3 years for any fiscal impact to flow into our organizations. This time, organizations are kind of on the bones of their backsides in terms of their balance sheets. So when things do go a bit wrong, and they're going wrong in all sorts of ways at the moment, in the ways you describe, there's very little to fall back on. So, this week I was talking to the crisis. They're losing hundreds of staff. Talking to NSPCC, they're losing hundreds. These are all household names. RSPCA are losing lots of people as well. Macmillan, the highest name recognition charity outside of Oxfam and so on, they're losing 400 people. It's really quite dramatic. So I think there's a few things here. One is that the leaders of those organisations at the moment, they're using this as a bit of an opportunity, a bit of a reset moment, because all those organisations grew quite large on the back of, many, many years of expanding money, donations, government contracts. Not all of them became as efficient and productive and impactful as they possibly could during that period. And this gives a chance to give those organisations a bit of a shake, I think. This isn't what the chief execs are saying, but I think this is what is unsaid. I think that there's a bit of a shakeout going on in the sector, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, by the way. But there is a bit of a shakeout happening. One hopes that we will see some more fit for purpose organisations coming out at this time. I hope that some of these organisations use this opportunity to become more entrepreneurial, more imaginative in pursuit of their mission, because necessity is the mother of invention. I really believe that. I think organisations that I know that are extremely financially secure are also very, very inert often and don't do change very well or very quickly, are horribly unresponsive to a changing world. I think when an organisation's got to kind of get its act together and respond to the world as it is, then you've got a set of drivers there that really help leadership to get on with what it needs to do. So I'm not wholly bothered about this. I think in the end we may find that quite a lot of good comes of it. So anyway, I'm going to get a horrible mailbag on this, I'm sure, but I think we were due a bit of a reckoning, I think, in our sector.
I guess change always comes with an opportunity, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And the best organisations will take it, And James Plunkett, who's speaking at one of our events soon, he talks about sort of the things that are going on, at the edges, as he calls them, are very vibrant. There are, despite all this stuff that's going on in the core, if you like, and in the established organisations, there's always brilliant stuff on the edges that's driving things on, and that's where I like to spend time, on the edges, and it's still there, it's still going on, and it's still driving change, and that's good.
Yeah. I'm very aware that this change, it impacts individuals. It's highly emotive. Can we pay our bills? Can we pay our mortgages? And Craig, as you know, I've just been working with my team over the last, 18 months really, to bring my lottery funded grant programme to an end. And we've done that very purposefully by including people, empowering people, and being very future focused and positive about one door closes and another one opens. What are your thoughts on the kind of leadership that organisations need now, and the people and individuals within those organisations need now to get through this?
These are really good questions. So let's start with the leadership. I spent yesterday actually up north with one of our famous national organisations looking at just this, that they're having to seriously restructure in order to survive and in order to make sure their mission is delivered into the future. If they didn't do this, there would be dire consequences. And I think there's three things that I think the leadership are doing right there. I think one is that they are extremely frank about the challenge. They're not sugarcoating it at all. And whether you're a frontline worker or a board member, you're getting essentially the same message, which is, we're having to make big changes in order to keep this mission alive, and being able to communicate that with skill, with humility and humanity is the number one challenge for leaders in this environment. I think number two in that is that I think leaders need to be willing to go the whole hog with this. The organisation I was talking to yesterday, I think it's going much further and harder than probably technically, it could do, but it's using this opportunity to not just to kind of get through the next year, but to actually wholly redefine how it achieves its mission. So we're not just getting to viability, we're getting to a point where we can offer something completely different. So lots and lots of people are going, and they will take on other types of people with other types of skills to do the mission in the new way. And again, that's quite brave, because people know that they're not just scaling back a bit, they're using that opportunity to make a bigger change. And that's very brave, because it's so easy to do the popular thing and hard to do the right thing, which is to reboot the whole mission. So that, I think that's the second thing, is that real kind of courage really to go further. And I think the third thing is, and this applies in good times and bad times, it's having not quite the audacity, but the I don't know, the willingness to turn up amid all this and still insist on high performance from everybody. Whether you're going or you're staying, the standards are the same. We need excellence every day, because if you're not excellent every day, we're failing with the people. It takes quite a lot of guts to turn up with that message in bad times as well as good. So, insistence on excellence at all times, taking much, much tougher decisions than perhaps politically you could get away with, and telling people the unvarnished truth about the future. These are all brilliant leadership attributes. I think, as there's a longer answer around people in the organization, and I don't feel quite as able to address it, but I think I know what I think about the leadership side of your question.
I think you're right. Having carried out or led restructures and redundancies and all of the things that go with them, both in a local authority and a few years later in the charitable sector, that first point that you made about being frank and open with people, I think is hugely important. The first time I ever did it, I was in a local authority, and there was very much a sense of, you don't say anything to anybody until you absolutely have to at the last minute, and then everybody hears the same thing. Whereas this time around, I was more in control of that policy, that procedure, that how we were going to do it. And I was very clear. We told everybody everything from the first point we were able to.
Hold on. Yeah.
And I think that is very important. So leaders who are going through this, please be as open as you can with your people. Trust them and be sensitive and respectful with the way that you communicate, the language that you use, but please include people, because that shocks and surprises at the other end, that is a pretty rubbish way to deal with your people and your situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. You only have to do the imaginative leap of thinking, well, how would I feel if I was being spoken to in a really coded way and a really sort of guarded way that infantilized me and kept me in the dark? How does that feel? It feels pretty bloody awful. And yeah, we take a risk by being a little bit more candid, but I think the reward is high. And I think sometimes the risks that go with doing it by the book are often understated, because you end up with a bunch of resentful, litigiously minded people who want to do wrong by you, harm by you, and that's not a good way to run things. So, yeah, I'm really glad to hear that you were able to have those kind of conversations and took it in your sort of stride to do that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's when quality suffers. So your third point about you have to expect high quality throughout this very emotional period, you have to be able to give back if you're expecting that high level of quality. So I absolutely agree, and having lived through it, I definitely agree. So Craig, just before you go, what is the final message you want to leave with listeners and watchers today?
Well, yeah, what's my big takeaway from today? Well, I thought I've been reflecting a lot this last couple of weeks anyway on how we show up as leaders in our organizations and with our people. And because I think, I deal every day with organizations, of which about probably 70% are going through quite significant challenge. Where my mind is at the moment is, if you're leading and you're leading in challenge, how self-aware you are and how you present and show up with your people will make an absolutely material difference to the way things play out in your situation. And although you might not always be aware of that, it is very, very important that you're mindful of what you communicate and how you communicate as a leader in a time of crisis. I don't think you can over communicate at these times. I think it's really important to be narrating and commentating on what you're doing. One of the things that the organization, I did a whole day with a team yesterday, and at the end of this really long, arduous day, the chief exec left the room and went on a call, an all staff call, 150 people on it or something, to basically talk about what had come out of the day and what that meant for people. And, so there was a gap of, 5 minutes between what was effectively a very, very important strategy event and a communication event. It wasn't like something he did in 5 weeks' time. He went online and straight away he was talking to people about what this session meant for the organization, and was really, really committed to doing that. And he got a hard time. He got a really hard time. I wouldn't have liked to have been him that day, but he shows up. He talks and he listens and he takes what's coming in and absorbs that, and people who are talking to him know that they've been heard. So I think they're my messages. Really, it's so easy to hide. Particularly when things are hard, it's quite easy to hide as a leader. We can still be seen to be doing okay, but really be hiding. Don't hide. Don't hide. That's my message, I think. Yeah, don't hide. Yeah.
Wonderful. Craig, that's been absolutely brilliant. I'm so glad I've been able to pin you down to have this conversation.
Well, thanks for bearing
brilliant
with
to have
me.
you here. As I've said, all of the links will be in the show notes, and there are some events coming up with Social Club very soon. So again, if you're a leader out there and you want to join with other leaders, make sure you click on Craig's website. Craig, thank you for joining me.
Well, Nia, thanks for having me. Thanks for such great questions, and thanks for producing such a great pod. Impressed.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining me on today's episode, where we aim to develop self-aware leaders around the globe to generate kinder, more respectful and creative working relationships through reflection, recognition and regulation. Head over to my website at knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk to sign up to my newsletter to keep up to date with my blog, podcast and book. Looking forward to having you on my learning journey.